They had risen from the shadows of the outer rim, a species bred on conquest, convinced that dominance was their birthright. For centuries they carved their empire in fire, enslaving weaker neighbors, erasing cultures, and bending entire systems to their will. Their arrogance had no limits, because no enemy had ever punished them with permanence. When they looked upon humanity, they saw nothing but prey, fragile bodies, primitive fleets, and a civilization still climbing its first steps into the wider galaxy. To them, humans were an inconvenience, not a rival. Their mistake was believing that underestimation could never be fatal. The first strike was not subtle. A human colony burned within hours of their arrival. Civilians were slaughtered, settlements bombarded from orbit, and survivors dragged away as trophies. The message was not hidden: submit or vanish. They thought terror would paralyze the humans, that pleas for mercy would follow swiftly. But the only sound after the massacre was silence. That silence was the first warning, though they were too blind to hear it. The Galactic Council gathered in their grand chambers, 1,000 voices buzzing with mockery and amusement. To them, it was a predictable tale. Humans were newcomers, inexperienced, still adjusting to interstellar law. Most agreed that their cries, when they finally came, would echo with desperation. Some laughed openly at the notion of humans resisting. The conquerors themselves attended, boasting of their triumph and promising that Earth's surrender would be swift. No one doubted it. No one except the few who had studied humanity's past and noticed a pattern that frightened them. When attacked without cause, humans did not beg, they endured. When cornered, they did not yield, they retaliated. But those voices were drowned out by the arrogance of the many. They mocked the human ambassadors who left the chambers in silence. They jeered at the lack of immediate response, twisting it into proof of weakness. And so the predators continued, sending more fleets across human borders, burning more settlements, enslaving more survivors. Every strike was meant to break spirit, but in truth each one was sealing their own fate. Among themselves, they boasted of victory. They believed they were scripting the final chapter of humanity. Their mistake was not seeing that history had already chosen another author. Humans did not answer immediately because they were listening, watching, measuring every detail of their enemy's approach. They did not rush to retaliation because they understood something their tormentors did not: wars are not won by the first strike, but by the last. The predators had never faced an enemy who fought to the absolute end. They had never faced a species that had risen from endless wars on its own world, that had survived disasters, plagues, and genocides, always learning, always adapting. To them, Earth was just another world to crush. To humanity, survival was the core of existence itself. And survival, for them, had always meant more than enduring. It meant ensuring that no threat would rise again. Still, in those early days, the galaxy saw only imbalance. On one side, an empire vast and seasoned, wielding fleets that stretched across the stars. On the other, humanity, young and untested. The outcome seemed obvious to all but the humans themselves. Observers assumed the story was already written. They had forgotten that arrogance blinds more than it guides, and that silence before the storm is never peace, only preparation. The conquerors celebrated in their halls, feasting on illusions of victory. They spoke of humans as livestock, as resources to exploit. Their commanders congratulated one another for swift conquests, blind to the truth building beneath their feet. They had mistaken quiet for weakness, hesitation for fear. What they failed to understand was that the silence of humanity was not surrender. It was the calm before retribution, a calm sharpened into something colder and far more enduring than vengeance. In their arrogance, they had lit a fire that would not extinguish until nothing remained of them but ash. The galaxy, laughing alongside them, did not yet realize it was witnessing the opening act of a story that would not end with surrender, but with annihilation. Humanity had been provoked, and history would show that there was never a species who survived the mistake of waking that storm. The galaxy waited for pleas, but humanity spoke none. The invaders expected supplication, envoys begging for ceasefires, and desperate offers of tribute. Instead, human diplomats vanished from the council chambers, their embassies sealed, their transmissions reduced to silence. The predators laughed at what they mistook for paralysis, yet the stillness was not fear. It was calculation. Behind closed doors, a rare unity gripped Earth and every outpost under its banner. Old rivalries dissolved overnight, and governments that once quarreled now shared one voice. Generals, scientists, strategists, and leaders gathered not to debate survival, but to design certainty. Each discussion was sharp, each decision absolute. There would be no half measures, no treaties to stall, no compromises to soothe aggressors. The invaders had chosen extermination as their method, and humanity had chosen response in kind. Factories that once built for commerce shifted to production that never ceased. Fleets were recalled not to defend, but to prepare. Scientists who had long worked in theory opened vaults of projects considered too dangerous for peaceful times. Nothing was dismissed, no resource withheld. On every world, from the industrial heart of Earth to the smallest mining outpost, humanity turned its gaze inward, hardening itself for what was to come. The silence unsettled only a few who watched carefully. A handful of alien observers noted the strange absence of surrender, the disappearance of human voices from negotiation tables. To them, the lack of panic was more alarming than an army in motion. They whispered warnings in council halls, reminding others of humanity's history, of the long record of battles fought to the bitter end. But the majority waved it aside, convinced that the newcomers were paralyzed, too slow to understand the scale of the threat before them. Within the Predator Empire, commanders grew bolder, pushing deeper into human systems, raiding colonies, and broadcasting their triumphs to the galaxy. Each act was meant to showcase dominance. Each assault was paraded as proof that humanity would never stand. But beneath that quiet exterior, humans were building momentum, storing a storm that had not yet broken. What few realized was that humans had learned patience in struggle. Their history was not filled with swift victories, but with wars dragged across years, with survival wrung from ruin. They understood the power of restraint, the value of striking only once the blow would be final. While the conquerors reveled in short-lived victories, humanity measured their every move, catalogued their every weakness, mapped their supply chains, tracked their command structures. No fleet movement escaped unnoticed. No world they held was free from scrutiny. The predators believed silence meant ignorance. In truth, silence meant that every human eye was fixed upon them, watching, learning, calculating. And calculation was far deadlier than rage. Rage fades, calculation endures until it is fulfilled. In those months of quiet, whispers of what was being prepared began to spread. Traders spoke of human convoys vanishing into secure zones, of orbital docks sealed from foreign eyes, of communications encrypted to a level no outsider could break. Rumors spread of new fleets assembled but never paraded, of weapons being tested in hidden regions of space. Most dismissed these as desperate lies from a beaten people, yet unease began to creep even into the most arrogant hearts. For all their boasts of victory, the predators could not explain why humans had not begged, why they had not even attempted to bargain. It was as if humanity was holding its breath, and the galaxy did not know why. The predators continued to strike, but cracks had begun to appear in their confidence. They expected a broken foe, and instead found an opponent that had gone utterly still, like a predator coiled in the dark. That stillness was not weakness. It was preparation, and preparation has a gravity that cannot be denied. The stage was not being set for surrender, but for something the galaxy had rarely witnessed, the patience of a species that had already decided the outcome. Humanity was not scrambling for survival. Humanity was sharpening its blade. And when the silence finally broke, there would be no mistaking what it meant. The quiet was not a pause in defeat. It was the drumbeat before a reckoning. When the silence finally shattered, it did not come with warnings or demands. It came with precision. Entire fleets of the invaders vanished in moments, destroyed before their distress calls could even escape the void. The galaxy, so certain that humanity would crumble, now watched as ships that had once symbolized dominance became wreckage drifting in silence. The first human strike was not reckless fury. It was surgical, calculated to the last detail. Supply hubs collapsed, command outposts were decimated, and invasion forces found themselves cut off from one another in the span of days. The predators had believed they were hunters, but in a single breath, they realized the roles had reversed. Human fleets appeared where no one thought they could reach, bypassing defenses, emerging deep in enemy territory as if the laws of distance no longer applied. Attacks struck in coordinated waves across light years, synchronized with such precision that alien admirals could not even comprehend how their enemies had mastered such movement. In their arrogance, they had underestimated not only human will, but human ingenuity. Worlds that had been safe at the heart of the Predator Empire now faced bombardment. Their colonies, once secure behind powerful fleets, were left exposed, and human weapons tore through orbital defenses with terrifying efficiency. But this was not conquest. Humans did not pause to raise flags or claim territories. They left only ash. They were not expanding, they were erasing. The invaders had once mocked humanity as inexperienced. Yet it became clear that humans had studied war with an intimacy others had long forgotten. They understood logistics, choke points, morale, and above all, fear. They struck not only where it hurt physically, but where it shattered spirit. Communication lines collapsed. Commanders could not speak to their fleets. Families within the Empire heard nothing from their soldiers, only silence and rumors of annihilation. Every victory the Predators had boasted of was buried beneath the avalanche of losses piling faster than they could count. For the first time in their history, the conquerors felt hunted. Their leaders called for regrouping, yet each rally point was destroyed before it could gather strength. Their admirals tried to predict human strikes, but humans did not move as they expected. They struck unpredictably, breaking every rule the Empire thought it understood about war. What the aliens had called chaos was in truth design. Humans used deception, misdirection, and feints with mastery, striking hardest where their enemy felt most secure. The Council, once entertained by the early conflict, now sat in horrified silence as reports arrived. Systems that had taken centuries for the Empire to build were reduced to cinders in weeks. Refugees fled across the stars, carrying stories of human ships that gave no quarter, of bombardments that continued until nothing living remained. The Council debated intervention, but none dared to act. They knew that to step between humanity and its prey would make them the next target. The Predators pleaded for allies, but their pleas fell into emptiness. The galaxy had never seen a retaliation so absolute, so merciless. Humanity was not content with balance. They sought finality. Each strike made it clear that this war would not end with treaties or reparations. It would end with erasure. Alien propaganda tried to frame the conflict as resistance against human aggression, but even their own citizens no longer believed it. Fear spread faster than any broadcast. Families fled from border worlds. Soldiers deserted, abandoning fleets to avoid the inevitable. Leaders once untouchable now hid in bunkers, knowing the reach of human fleets was no longer bound by distance. In their arrogance, the Predators had mistaken silence for weakness. Now they understood what that silence had been hiding: an iron decision. Humanity had chosen not survival, but extermination of the threat. The Predators had thought themselves the apex. They discovered too late that humanity had no interest in competing for dominance. Humanity's only interest was permanence, and permanence required obliteration. The retaliation was not loud, not drawn out with speeches or proclamations. It was cold, efficient, and merciless. For every human life extinguished, 100 alien worlds burned. The Predators had provoked a storm, and now they drowned in it. And the galaxy, watching with growing dread, realized the truth that the Empire had failed to see. Humanity did not fight wars. Humanity ended them. The Empire that once seemed unshakable began to fracture under the weight of unrelenting destruction. Entire sectors fell into chaos, their fleets annihilated, their infrastructure reduced to smoldering debris. At first, leaders insisted it was temporary, that regrouping would restore order. But regrouping required supply lines, and supply lines no longer existed. Each attempt to reorganize collapsed before it could take shape, crushed by strikes that always arrived sooner than expected. Worlds once central to their dominance descended into panic. Refugees crowded spaceports, clawing for a chance to escape, yet human fleets had sealed every path. No exodus could succeed, no sanctuary remained. Rumors spread that even the deepest strongholds had already been mapped by human intelligence, that no corner of the Empire was beyond their reach. Soldiers sent to defend these worlds often abandoned their posts, choosing desertion over certain death. Fear moved faster than orders, hollowing the Empire from within. The ruling elite tried negotiation, broadcasting desperate appeals for a ceasefire. They promised reparations, swore that atrocities would cease, begged for dialogue. But every message was met with silence, or obliteration of the channel from which it was sent. Humanity was not interested in promises. Humanity had chosen a path that allowed no reversal. Once provoked, they would not retreat until the aggressor ceased to exist. The council chambers, once filled with mocking laughter, now filled with unease. Delegates who had dismissed humanity now shifted nervously, careful to measure their words. Some argued intervention was necessary to preserve balance, yet none dared commit. To act in defense of the predators would mean sharing their fate. So the galaxy watched, silent and afraid, as one of its most feared empires unraveled before their eyes. The collapse was not only military but cultural. Entire generations who had been raised to believe in their empire's invincibility now faced the shattering truth that it could be destroyed utterly. On conquered worlds, subjugated species rose in revolt, emboldened by the sight of their masters failing. Garrisons that once enforced obedience found themselves surrounded and overthrown. The predators discovered that the terror they had used as a weapon for centuries dissolved the moment they showed weakness. Their subjects no longer feared them, they feared humanity, and that fear made rebellion inevitable. Even their capital, once thought untouchable, fell into disarray. Leaders retreated into bunkers, cut off from the stars, while civilians rioted in the streets. Entire ministries collapsed as communications went dark, and those who once boasted of ruling the galaxy now hid from the sky itself. Every layer of their society, from the military to the civilian, was unraveling under the certainty that annihilation was no longer avoidable. Attempts to rally allies failed. No empire dared open its fleets to defend them. The cost was too great, and the risk of attracting human wrath unbearable. So their pleas echoed unanswered, their desperation ignored. They stood alone, isolated, while humanity pressed forward with absolute determination. The predators began to plead not for victory, not even for survival, but for preservation of their name, their culture, their memory. They begged that humanity at least spare fragments of their species. But the response, when it finally came, was clear: there would be no fragments, no remnants, no memory that might allow resurgence. The invaders had chosen extermination when they first struck against humanity. Humanity had simply accepted their terms. As capital worlds fell one after another, the lesson became undeniable. This was not revenge in the ordinary sense. Revenge can be satisfied. This was something deeper, a commitment to permanence. Humanity's retaliation was not measured by battles won, but by whether the enemy could ever rise again. And as each system fell silent, as each archive was erased, as each leader was dragged from hiding, it became certain: this empire would never return. Across the galaxy, fear rooted itself in every species that watched. The message was unspoken but unmistakable. To provoke humanity was to invite extinction. This was not rumor or legend, but a truth carved into the ruin of a once mighty empire. And those who once laughed now whispered among themselves, wondering if the storm that had consumed their neighbor might one day turn its eyes toward them. The last strongholds burned as if they had never existed. Cities once filled with arrogance were reduced to glass, and archives that had preserved centuries of culture were turned to dust. Nothing of the empire remained except fragments scattered through void and ruin. Humanity had not simply defeated an enemy, they had rewritten the meaning of defeat itself. Where others left rivals crippled, humans left only silence. When the final broadcast ended, the galaxy listened in dread. Humanity did not deliver threats or boasts. They spoke a single message, delivered to every council chamber, every relay, every listening ear. It was calm, measured, without anger or triumph, They said that they had not started the war. They had not sought territory, nor conquest, nor dominance. They had sought only survival, and survival required certainty. They ended with a warning, sharp as steel: there would never be a second chance for any who dared the same path. That message spread like fire across every world. Children who once grew up on stories of their own empires now grew up on whispers of what had happened when one species chose to provoke humanity. Teachers spoke carefully, advisors warned quietly, leaders planned with dread. No one wished to share the fate of the annihilated. In council meetings, the mere mention of humans brought stillness. Allies measured every word, adversaries softened their tone, and those who once jeered now lowered their voices in fear. The memory of what had happened became a shadow that stretched across generations. In the markets of distant systems, traders told the story in hushed voices. A great empire that once ruled half the stars vanished because they believed humans would bend. Among soldiers of other species, humanity became the example used to enforce discipline. Do not underestimate an enemy, or you will suffer the fate of those who once mocked Earth. Even rulers who had never met a human learned to rule with caution, shaping their policies around the question that never left their minds: what if humanity is watching? And humanity themselves did not celebrate. There were no parades, no monuments raised to glory. They did not need them. Their victory was not a spectacle, it was a statement. To them, the war was finished, the enemy erased, and the lesson clear. The silence left in its wake was enough. Where others glorified conquest, humanity turned back to its own rebuilding, carrying scars but without regret. The galaxy expected triumph, but humanity gave only stillness, as though the annihilation of an empire was not a victory at all, but a necessity. Those who studied the ruins came away shaken. There were no survivors to rebuild, no colonies spared to preserve memory. The predators' language, their culture, their banners, all erased until only whispers remained. Humanity had not destroyed only fleets and armies. They had dismantled the very idea of the species, cutting it out of history like a disease that could never return. It was this precision, this commitment to permanence, that chilled the galaxy most. Anyone can win a war. Only humanity had shown that they would ensure no war needed to be fought twice. As centuries passed, the lesson did not fade. Parents warned their children never to mock the quiet, never to mistake patience for weakness. Politicians crafted treaties with humanity in mind, even if humanity never demanded them. Explorers avoided human borders, not from law but from fear. The legend grew, not as myth but as memory etched in the stars themselves. Every new generation carried the same truth: there had once been a species who provoked humans, and they no longer existed. The silence of that absence became the loudest warning the galaxy had ever known. It did not need retelling by humans. It was carried forward by every other species, repeated like a prayer of survival. Humanity did not rule the galaxy, yet their presence ruled its choices. No one dared test them again, because the cost was written in ash. In the end, the last empire that provoked humanity left behind no heirs, no monuments, no future. What remained was a scar across the galaxy's memory, a reminder etched into the marrow of civilizations. And the truth whispered in every corner, from the grandest council to the smallest outpost, was always the same: once, they provoked the humans. Once,